What's the number one mistake ruining our sleep?
Netflix. The modern day competitor to sleep.
What's the biggest misunderstanding we have about stress?
I think it's really that stress is bad. People look at stress as having a negative connotation, but without stress, we wouldn't wake up and do things in our life. We need challenge, expand our ability, make us grow physically, emotionally, spiritually. Without those, we would literally not evolve.
If someone hates their job, they're not fulfilled from the work they do, how does that influence their well-being?
Burnout, by definition, is a disconnect between mind and body. The problem is with things like stress and burnout, the longer it goes on, the less connected we are to our body. It can become masked, and so people might not even recognize the symptoms eventually, because they find those coping mechanisms. So a lot of people find me once they've had a mental breakdown.
And how common do you think that experience is?
It's very common. For the majority of people who struggle with things like anxiety, it's often because they're...
Martin McPhilimey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Egan. Appreciate being here.
So if your life was a book, what would be some of the earlier chapters?
That's a fantastic question. I guess growing up in a city called Coventry in the UK, going to an all-boys school and being an individual who excelled in sport and science would be the areas where I would probably dive into first. Now, I went to an unforgiven school. It was a very rough school in a quite rough city itself in the UK, and you either had to learn to stand up for yourself or you had to excel in something. Now, being in that sort of school and being a bit of a nerdy, I guess, geek who's good at science doesn't cut the the culture of being in a school like that. So thankfully I was good at sport and quite physical, and so I could hide a persona in my athleticism, but also be smart enough to get through school. And I would say that that gave me some foundations to be a pretty resilient man growing up. And I always look back to my younger years and think that set me up to be able to do what I've done, which is move around to the other side of the world on my own and become a scientist and travel the world. So that would be the early years. Always fascinated with the human body. I have been fascinated with human performance, health, psychology since I can even 10 years old. And that essentially, at 15 years old, I had my a goal come to me that I wanted to be a scientist and live in Australia. That was around the year that Johnny Wilkinson won England the Rugby World Cup. I was a rugby player. And my brother got the opportunity to come and visit Australia, and I never got the opportunity to. And so I decided that was a goal of mine. And then I trained as a sports scientist. That was the area that I worked in initially, doing a degree. Then I went to do a master's, and my master's specialised in breathing, particularly looking at how we can train the inspiratory muscles to improve recovery during exercise. And so you could say that I started to specialise in breathing quite early in my life. I was probably 20, 21 years old. And I wanted to work with athletes, but it's, again, that's unless you know the right people, it's not like you can just get a degree and walk straight into a sports club. That's what you kind of think when you're going to do a degree. You're going to come out the other side and go straight into a club and make an impact. But it's not like that. So I trained as a clinical scientist. I actually get onto an academic program, also a clinical program called the National School of Healthcare Sciences in the UK. I trained in hospitals for 3 years as a respiratory and sleep scientist, working with very, very sick people from all walks of life in the public space, to then moving over into Australia in 2016 on my own, not knowing anyone here, and finding myself moving from the biggest hospital in London to a small little private clinic in Perth. So big change. I probably made, as a scientist, a poor career choice, but for my own life, wanting to live in Australia, I probably made the best decision I've ever made in my life. So career-wise, I just started to notice that there was a big difference in the people that I was serving. I was no longer with the sick people, people on death's door, but more so people who were worried about their health, and often getting results back from their doctors saying, your results look normal or within the normal range, but yet they were still showing signs and symptoms of issues, but they were often medically undiagnosed. And I just kept seeing a pattern that it was stress. And so I decided to start working with people online in stress and kind of like weave people, my patients that I was seeing in the clinics, and saying, hey, they're not doing anything for here, but I have a side project over here. If you want to come and have a conversation about how I can support you. Eventually that led to me deciding to quit my clinical career during COVID, leave Australia, travel the world with my now wife, and built an online business around stress management, particularly using breathing, sleep, and the nervous system as three key areas in that. And now I actually have a school. So I'm the founder of the School of Breath Science, which teaches a high-level, university-level education in breathwork, breathing, nervous system regulation, sleep, etc., etc.
Awesome. What's the biggest misunderstanding we have about stress?
I think it's really that stress is bad. I think people look at stress as having a negative connotation, but without stress, we wouldn't wake up and do things in our life. And so we need challenge. We need things that are going to expand our ability, make us grow physically, emotionally, spiritually. And without those, we would literally not evolve. So we wouldn't adapt to the environment. So I think the biggest misconception, first of all, is that stress equals a negative connotation. Then the other the thing that I see is the biggest misconception is that there are wellness practices out there that are good for stress, or there's wellness practices that are not so good for stress. And people look at it as it's the stressor or the practice that's the good or bad thing, not the individual's ability to recover or have resilience from that stressor. And so ice baths, for example, they've blown up in popularity over the last 5 or 6 years. They're everywhere in WA now, all the wellness centres that are popping up. And because there is evidence to show that they're beneficial for things like stress and recovery. But what people don't consider is, where are they at right now? If you've got someone who's already burnt out and chronically stressed and you just add another stressor, then you've accumulated too much stress. So regardless of the practice, hey, getting an ice bath might make you feel good, might give you adrenaline, might give you dopamine, might make you feel as if you've got more energy, which changes your state. But what's the cost long term of adding that additional stressor in, even though you're overworked, underslept, under-recovered, and overtrained?
So it's all relative to the individual. And yeah, that's what I think a lot of the things with like saunas, ice baths, training, like we want to have a concrete conclusion around this practice, like ice baths are good or bad for us. But like I said, for some people it's going to be beneficial and for others not so. And depends at what state of time as well, because it's like going to the gym or training, right? Like training makes you more capable and resilient. But if you're already overtraining, then more stimulus isn't going to be of benefit.
Yeah, there is... we live in a world of black or white. It really, on things like social media, where a lot of people get inspiration and education from nowadays, and that's great, it's accessible. But the issue, as we talked about earlier, is like social media tries to create ways where people are just going to capture attention. So black or white information stands out. Whereas I sit as a scientist in that nuance area of going, okay, well, this is the appropriate thing to do for the appropriate person at this time. And it's very nuanced. But that doesn't capture attention.
Doesn't sell nuance.
It doesn't sell at all. And so if I was to work with you or work with anyone, first of all, I want to assess where you're at. And then I want to assess where you want to go. And then we need to make the correct choices and the right pathway to build you up to be able to build your, for example, your stress capacity or your resilience. But perhaps maybe you need to start sleeping appropriately first, right hours and consistently, before you've even been able to allow your body and brain to get into its state of self-regulation, that we can bring additional stresses in that it can then bounce back from.
How would we accurately assess where we're currently at? What signals would you be looking for?
First of all, a dialogue around a conversation. Subjective feeling of what you would tell me about how you're feeling in your life. Do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel stressed? Do you feel like you're not sleeping well? They're going to be the best markers because they always instantaneously give you context. No data point without context is useful. It's irrelevant if you've got a number or statistic and it's not got any context to it. So I would always, first of all, interview people And then there's going to be some validated subjective questionnaires that you can take around stress, markers of anxiety, or sleep quality and things like that. And then we can move, if we want to look at your Whoop band and look at your data and go, right, let's have a look at your resting heart rate. Let's look at your heart rate variability. Let's have a look at your core temperature and how is that aligning across a pattern with what you say is happening in your lifestyle. So if I see a deviation of heart rate variability increasing, for example, and I say to you, what was happening around January the 30th, like 2025, when your heart rate variability was at its highest, and you would say to me, oh, that's when I went on holiday with my family and I had a really good time and I just forgot about the world. It's like, right, cool, we know that's your highest point in your relaxation, recovery, etc. That's the context that we've actually observed. Then I have a look, okay, what happened in April 2025 where it's at its lowest, and you say, oh, that was where I was injured, I couldn't train, I was drinking alcohol because I was just trying to just get on with life despite feeling like pissed off that I was not able to train, for example. Right, we know where your low points are, and now we've got context and we've got patterns, and so we can work with those to try and move you towards either being in a better position or stabilizing those positions.
How much does alignment in people's lives factor into stress and burnout? Like if someone hates their job, they're not fulfilled from the work they do, how does that influence their well-being?
I would actually say that burnout by definition is a disconnect between mind and body. It's where people have either a willingness to want to succeed, or they are struggling with a lack of resources, but need to keep pushing because they need to keep getting the bills, to pay for mortgages and family, et cetera, but they have become so oriented with mind that they've started to way further back. They forgot what the body signals are telling them. So if we are not paying attention to the fatigue signals, we're not paying attention to the pain or the emotional dysregulation. We're just trying to push it aside because we need to keep on going, which is what the majority of people do. Then eventually the brain will learn that, okay, well, we're not going to tune into the body anymore. We're just going to listen to what the mind's saying, and then we'll start to disconnect from those sensations. Or we find unconscious or subconscious coping mechanism. Caffeine, it might be your ice bath, it might be high intensity workout giving you that artificial adrenaline. Over time, that's going to have so much wear and tear on the system. It's also going to have a lot of issues with allowing your system to recalibrate and self-regulate at nighttime. That's what leads to chronic disease. That's what leads to anxiety and depression. If you're not connected to who you are and your authentic self, which is understanding your body and your sensations, then there is going to be misalignment there, and the end result of that is disease, sickness, injury, burnout.
Do people usually come to you and treat stress and burnout in their lives as an indication that there's something wrong with them, or are they able to use this as a feedback mechanism to make changes in their lives? Like, how do people internalize and understand and process the physiological symptoms that they're going through?
The problem is with things like stress and burnout is the longer it goes on for, because the less connected we are to our body, like literally, like physiologically, we stop sending interpreting signals from the body to the brain, it can become masked. And so people might not even recognize the symptoms eventually, because they find those coping mechanisms. So a lot of people find me once they've had a mental breakdown, once they've had, an issue with depression, once they've gone through a series of like a big, shift in their life. Maybe they lose a job, maybe they lose a loved one, maybe they just realize that they're in a deep dark hole, or they have a spiritual awakening. That's usually when people reach out. Now, I wish it would be much earlier, but the recognition of these issues when they start to crop up is subtle for a lot of people. Feeling chronically stressed and a little bit frustrated, that's usually the first signs that you probably should start to make changes in your life. But a lot of people can handle frustration, or a lot of people want to continue to try to impress their bosses or their father or their mother or whatever it is. That external validation that starts to occur at a young age as a child, and then teenage years, and then young 20s, and even in your 30s. But that external validation is what leads to that disconnect. People are not understanding themselves and not doing it for themselves. They're doing it for others, don't have boundaries and put in place. And so that's where there is this, I guess, a mask to it that people don't recognize, or they don't want to look at it, or maybe it's scary to face the truth. And so it takes something quite significant often for people then to reach out to me. Of course, there are symptoms, or someone says, I'm not sleeping while I'm doing this, or I've noticed breathlessness, and they might reach out. But usually in the case of burnout, it's when there's been a significant mental issue.
What do you think about hustle culture?
I think there's a time and place. I don't want to say no one should hustle, because at the end of the day, hard work does often get you in a position, but it needs to come with awareness. Hard work on its own eventually will lead to, yes, success, but then if you only have the belief that hustle equals success, what happens when things start going wrong? Or when your health starts to impair and you're losing your energy? Well, if your belief is only hustle, you're going to have to keep on hustling. But if you can hustle for the first 4 or 5 years of creating a business and getting into momentum, but then put strategies and tactics and structure into place to understand how to create longevity, now that you don't only have a belief system that hustle's the only way to go, you can understand that, I can step back and take some time with my family and be present. I can go and see my friends and sit at the beach a bit more and chill out, and I'm still going to be able to create success with this. And so I don't want to rule out the fact that you need to hustle. We do need to hustle. We're in a society where there is so much noise. We've got to stand out in the crowd. But once you start getting momentum, and we start putting things into place to ensure that that's sustainable.
Yeah, I find it's like when you are aware of the practical strategies that allow you to be consistent for a long period of time, it's like you have integrated a system in your life that allows you to show up for 10, 20 years, right? Which will inevitably get you results. But when you have that hustle mindset, I feel like I've been doing that recently, where like you're just putting the foot to the floor. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're just on the accelerator. And while it does get results and you do see progress, there's almost a fear that gets cultivated where like things need to come instantly. And you also start to lose sight of things as well, because it puts you in a state internally that allows you to not see things as accurately. You waste a lot of time mentally stressing about things that don't really need to be stressed about. Take me through the process of that. Like, how does our internal chemistry change as a result of being fully on the accelerator and then not being able to maybe have that balance in our lives as well?
Yeah. So, the first thing that we have to consider here is our nervous system. Okay. And we have in our nervous system, we've got the sympathetic and parasympathetic. We're talking about the autonomic nervous system. One of them is putting the pedal down, going the gas. That's your stress response. That's your sympathetic nervous system. The other one is your parasympathetic nervous system. I liken that to it's like your parachute. That's something that's going to help slow you down, help you rest, and help you recover. And we want to have the ability to push. We also want to have the ability to switch off. So it's like a seesaw. And so a healthy system can move between those states of stress and relaxation quite easily. But the more we shift to one side, so the more we put the pedal down on the gas, the more the brain anticipates that stress is going to keep on coming. And the nervous system learns. When the nervous system learns, the brain then starts to predict and anticipate that the next thing that's going to occur is going to be a stressor. So we start to get a shift towards, we call it sympathetic overdrive. Okay, there's a more balance in your sympathetic nervous system. Now, the problem is that this starts to withdraw the activity of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is what sends those signals from the body to the brain to interpret the state that we're in. So the more stressed we are, like I was saying earlier, the more disconnected we are from understanding the signals that are saying we're fatigued or tired or sick or wow.
Which would help us pull up a little bit.
That's your awareness, right? That is the awareness piece. Like I can internally recognize that I need rest. Now I'm going to choose and take the action to do that. However, most people don't want to sit with those sensations. They don't want to sit with the feeling of the angst, of the anxiety, or the fatigue, or the emotions that they need to process. At the end of the day, sensations are there to trigger and warn us something. That is usually that we need to process something. And to be able to sit and breathe through that is the way that you allow the energy of those systems to move through and to self-regulate. What then happens is, because people don't like to the unpleasant sensations they're experiencing, is they might start to create avoidance mechanisms. And so those avoidance mechanisms are the things that you were just saying. I can't sit down and rest today because tomorrow I've got to do X, Y, and Z. I've got to drop the kids off school, then I've got to get to work, then I've got to, I've got to finish this, I've got to finish that. Being in the head, thinking about the future. Well, what does being in the head, thinking about the future, do to your awareness of what you're feeling in your body?
Oh, you're disconnected because you're at a future point in time.
Yeah. So actually being in the mind becomes a coping mechanism for people to deal with the emotional dysregulation they're feeling in their body.
Because it does give you the sense of control, right? Like, it makes you feel in control. What is the like underwriting thing causing that? I know for me at the moment, like I think it does, a lot of it just comes down to fear, right? Like, there's these things, these conversations, like, whether it, whatever responsibilities, whatever tasks we're doing, there's like this, we've got this unwritten contract in our lives. Like, if this happens and this is where the mind's concentrating on, then this will happen in my life. Usually like the stress relief, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like we cause ourselves to be stressed. It's Chris Williamson always talks about it, right? Like, we sacrifice the thing we want to get something that we sacrifice to get it. So it is interesting. What do you think's underwriting this?
The ability for people to not sit with unpleasant sensations in the body.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that anxiety that lingers behind, if I don't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm not worthy. Yeah. And if you're not worthy, then how do you feel about yourself? So the coping mechanism of doing is really, a distraction to allow yourself to feel worthy of actually, feeling good about yourself. At least I managed to tick off X, Y, and Z today. Yeah, and sometimes that it becomes a mundane thing, not actually big tangible goals, but just being able to get through the little day by day, little pieces that people need to do, or fill in the gaps between, I'm saying I'm busy and I'm sitting down to do this, but most people get paralysis and they're procrastinating, they're not actually doing things with their time because they're constantly feeling overwhelmed. Yeah, I had a gentleman that I was working with a little while back, and he was struggling with panic disorder, anxiety and panic attacks. And when I met up with him, I could see in his breath, he was constantly trying to grab a breath, constantly sighing. We call that dysfunctional breathing, and that's a result of dysregulation in the nervous system. And when I got him to start some practices, we have to start in a position where it's about relaxation, about deep rest, about getting more recovery. And every time I gave him a practice of Yoga Nidra, which is a traditional deep rest practice, he just said to me, he's like, I just don't think it's for me. It's just, it's just not working. And I haven't got time to just lay down 20 minutes and listen to someone guide me through a tape. And I'm like, well, what's your logical reason? His logical reason was, I don't have time to do it. I'm like, well, if I'm giving you something to do, then you want to make time. He couldn't give me a tangible reason. So I've said to him, well, next time you go and do it, what I want you to do is just focus and pay attention to when you lay down and start to rest, what is it you feel? And then what I want you to do is pay attention to where your mind goes when you notice what you feel. And so the next week he'd come back to me and I was like, so how did you go? So it was really crazy. When I lay down and started to rest, I felt really sad. Okay. And where did your mind go? So all I could think about is like work and what work I had to do. So what did you do? It was like, well, I got up and started to try some work. I was like, how did you go? So I couldn't focus because I was overwhelmed. And so what did you do then? So I just went to the gym and distracted myself, went on my phone. Okay, right. Now we're starting to see a bit of a pathway of coping here. Logically, right now, I asked him, do you have more work or an overwhelming amount of work on right now than you have before? He was like, logically, no. I was like, well, perhaps you're not overwhelmed with work, but the first feeling that you felt was sadness. Is there anything in life to be overwhelmed with sadness? And he just burst out in tears, full on tears. He said, I lost my dad 2 years ago and I've never grieved him. Yeah. He kept sighing, just allowed him to cry. I said, just allow your breath to do what it needs to do. This is processing. Don't avoid, don't need to say sorry, because he kept saying sorry, like I don't need to cry. It's like, hey man, this is you being authentic to what you're feeling right now. Allow it to happen. By the end of the session, he had no deep breaths, no sighing occurring, no sign of dysfunctional breathing because he started to process that emotion. The breath reveals what we're suppressing.
That's powerful. And how common do you think that experience is for
I think
people?
it's very common for the majority of people who struggle with things like anxiety attacks and panic attacks. It's often because they're ignoring the signs of what their body is telling them and trying to avoid, what they're feeling. We know in the brainstem, we know that the same pathway that generates grief is the same pathway that generates panic, because it's separation distress. And that separation doesn't necessarily mean losing a loved one. It obviously, of course, does, but it also means losing an identity. Perhaps there's an athlete who's got an injury who can no longer compete. Perhaps there's someone who loses a job. Perhaps someone who's in a relationship with someone they love that they get lost. Or perhaps it is grief of a loss through death. All those things, which are attachments to your identity, when you lose those, you have separation distress. You have to grieve that process. But grief is a challenging thing to sit with. And so people will find ways to move forward or to cope or to distract themselves without processing it. And eventually that leads to the body wanting to say, hey, look, you need to pay attention. If you don't pay attention to the signal, we're going to get louder and louder and louder. And guess what? Loud noises in the system. Panic. Anxiety.
And how does that play out? Does that cause disease? And
Yeah. At the end of the day, whilst disease is, there's multiple different reasons for disease. We could say, lack of movement. We could say poor diet. All of it comes down, essentially down to things like stress and inflammation in the body. And the system's not been able to self-regulate. And so if we're not understanding and attuning to what we're experiencing and understanding through awareness of how to process emotion, how to regulate our nervous system, how to switch off and get good rest when we've had a quite a stressful day. If those things are not put into place, then the system's going to be out of balance. It's not going to be able to self-regulate. We're going to be disrupting homeostasis, which requires a lot of energy. That energy consistently needs to show up with, more stress in the system, which requires more energy. Eventually, our mitochondria become dysfunctional, and therefore, we're not able to provide that energy anymore. That's when we get addicted to the caffeine, maybe drugs. Work becomes an addiction because it gives us stress becomes an addiction because it gives us some energy to artificially have adrenaline in our body. But that mitochondria, which is your battery, once that wears out and it becomes, it starts to lose its cell structure, DNA starts to change in there, it starts to get leaky. That is mitochondrial dysfunction. Now we're starting to see things like chronic fatigue and burnout. We're starting to see inflammation. We're starting to see depression. We're starting to see mental health issues.
how does someone calibrate their system as they're, I think a lot of people can relate to the feelings of stress and overwhelm in some capacity. How does someone know the most effective path for them? Like, is it worth putting down the accelerator and they just don't have enough willpower? Or are there some foundational gaps in their life? Like, how would you advise someone to reflect on how they feel, their behaviors in their life, and probably what's the most effective course of action?
I think being honest with yourself, or finding someone that you respect that can have a truthful conversation with you, where they're not going to, fluff around and just tell you what you want to hear.
Yes, man.
Yeah. Honesty is, truth and honesty is critical here with self and those around. To ask yourself, like, where am I showing up in life that perhaps I'm not doing a service to my own health or my own well-being? That was the first thing, a self-audit and being honest. Then I would say that, the starting place that every single one of my clients will be is looking at routine and structure around habits, around sleep, because our system self-regulates through predictability. As I mentioned earlier, the brain is always trying to anticipate what happens next. And so we have circadian rhythms. Cortisol increases in the morning, it peaks around midday, starts to drop back down again. Melatonin comes up in the evening. We have other hormones that are all on these rhythms that are natural to nature and to biology. Environment and behavior is what entrains those. Okay, and so we're not attached internally and aware of those rhythms, but we've got behaviors that are setting them on the outside. This is your feeding behavior, your movement behavior, your sleep-like cycles, sleep-wake cycle like dark, and then your temperature. If those are not in rhythm from your behavior, i.e. getting up at the same time in the morning and going to bed at the same time in the evenings, feeding consistently at the same time, moving consistently at the same time, how can the brain predict what's next? If it can't predict what's next, then it's not able to learn to when to switch off and when to switch on, how to self-regulate and when to allow for parasympathetic activity to come up, or when for the sympathetic activity to come up. And so that's the first place that I recommend people start is looking at structure, ritual, and routine, and ensuring that the first place we'll be looking at sleep.
What are the best habits that we can follow?
The best habits. Waking up in the morning, getting sunlight in your eyes. I think Andrew Huberman has said that over and over and over again, but that light aspect of waking up and moving is such a crucial component to setting up what nature intends us to do in our biology, because light is the giver of life. And so that in itself, I would say, is probably one of the prime things. Waking up and setting yourself up for a morning routine that is going to be thriving versus just jumping on the phone, technology, going straight for the coffee or the caffeine or the hit to get you waking up. Allow yourself to wake up in a more natural way. That is what I would say is concrete to put into place initially. And then, looking at how are you managing your stress throughout the day? Okay, if there is a moment in life where we have, in day to day where we have stresses, whether that's going to the gym, whether that is going to work and finishing a project, whether that's coming home when the kids are kind of running around and, it's crazy and you've had a long day and you're like, last thing you want to do is walk in the house where there's all this energy when you're feeling tired. Having small little habitual opportunities throughout the day that allow yourself just to sit, go internal, and just to learn to just decompress, whether that be 5 minutes of breathing, whether that be a 10-minute walk out in nature, whether that be laying down and just closing your eyes and just having 10 minutes of just tuning into what you're feeling. Those scattered throughout the day is going to teach the system to self-regulate. So, if the brain can't predict and it's learned that stress is going to keep on coming, then we need to unlearn that. And that is through what I would call arousal management, so managing your stress levels, or allostatic management, which would be managing the total amount of stresses that you have accumulating throughout the day or week or months. And then breathing. How are you breathing? People don't consider, because breathing is such an unconscious thing and it's such a thing that we do all our life, it's like, what is the physical way that you breathe in terms of mechanically? Do we breathe into the chest? Are we breathing shallow? Have we got poor posture that's creating restriction in our diaphragm? If we have, people are going to breathe faster. Faster breathing means more adrenaline. More adrenaline means more stress. And so we can change the way that people breathe. We can retrain breathing mechanics. We can change so that they breathe using more of the diaphragm. They can slow their rate down so they can reduce the adrenaline in their body. They can focus on bringing more expansion to get better, more oxygen in per breath to become more efficient. And by doing all that, it teaches the system that we're safe. Again, it teaches that self-regulation. And that starts to send signals to the brain that we can drop the threat. We can drop the seeking of stress, and it actually changes how the mind perceives the world. So the way you breathe is a direct reflection of your nervous system, which is a direct reflection of how you perceive the world.
What about nose breathing? It's a big thing that people talk about. What's the difference between nose breathing and mouth breathing?
The nose has 33, 35 maybe more functions that assist with breathing, respiration, emotional regulation. The mouth has a very limited capacity to do that. Okay, so nose breathing, we have, first of all, small little hairs and little cells called cilia cells, and we have turbinates, which are all to do with purification, humidification, filtering the environment from getting inside our body, so immune system. But the nose itself connects to the olfactory bulb. And when that olfactory bulb is stimulated by our airway, it sends signals to the emotional parts of the brain to entrain how we should be feeling emotionally according to the environment that we're in. When we mouth breathe, it skips all that. And so it's been shown over and over again that nasal breathing can improve memory function, the ability to relate to emotions, the ability to express emotions, the ability to recall and change memories. Mouth breathing hasn't. Okay, and so typically when we nasal breathe, we breathe a little bit slower. We bring in nitric oxide in, which can allow for greater gas exchange, more oxygen getting into the body. Mouth breathing will be faster and shallower. And so we could say, as a bit of a general rule, that if someone is breathing more forcefully and through the mouth, it's an indicator that they're feeling stressed. Yeah, if someone's breathing nasal and gentle and slow, that's an indicator that someone's pretty grounded and regulated. And so by just looking at those two things, which again is black or white, and it's not quite like that, but just for an example, we can tell how someone, I can read the room, for example. If someone sits down with me for the very first time and I can hear them breathing, I might say, how are you feeling? And if they say they're anxious, okay, well, that matches.
What is my...
Yeah, you've been, calm. You've been calm, you've been regulated, you've been pretty, right now, mouth's closed, you're breathing slow. So I can see that you're present. I can see that you're grounded. I can see that you haven't got too much anticipation or worry or concern. You're quite comfortable. But if you were sat there and your mouth was open and I could see movement, then I would probably also try to say, take a breath, or be a bit more warming, a bit more inviting. I would change my tonality of my voice, slow the pace down. I'd probably lean back a little bit to make myself comfortable so that you're more comfortable. Yeah. Try to make those subtle changes. And if people respond, then great. If they don't respond and they're still breathing that way, that might indicate there's dysfunctional breathing. And that's become a learned behavior. And that's something that we need to then retrain.
What's the number one mistake ruining our sleep?
Netflix. I think that is the biggest, and that's I'm using that as an example. Of course, all streaming platforms are the modern day competitor to sleep. The next episode, that automatic thing that happens where most series now they're either 30 or 40 minutes long. Sometimes they're 20 minutes because the attention span's getting shorter, but they'll leave you on a cliffhanger. They'll then automatically go to the next one. And that novelty is what keeps the mind wanting to watch.
Oh, I have to watch it.
Yeah. Okay. And so you might have think I was saying something completely different. Most people might say light or watching the screen or being on your phone. It's actually been shown in a research more recently that the blue light doesn't affect too much your sleep.
Really?
It's the context and the continuation of different information and novelty that is actually keeping us awake. And it's keeping us awake for about an hour on average per night later than it was, say, 10 years ago.
So blue light doesn't affect sleep quality?
It doesn't seem to... we used to think that having a screen in front of your face would push melatonin a little bit later on, which it does. And that would then lead us to sleeping a little bit later. But there was some research that came out last year over at the University of Sydney, and they were getting teenagers to have screens from iPads full blast, light in front of their eyes for an hour, and then looking at how long did it take them to fall asleep relative to when they didn't do that, and the difference was 3 minutes. So nothing. But when they were told they can use this as freely, these iPads, what kept them awake was the fact that they were still watching something.
Did that affect sleep quality though? Like with the screens and not having the screens?
No, didn't seem to have minimal effect on sleep quality.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So that's not to say that blue light isn't an issue. There's a difference between watching a screen and being in an environment full of blue light all day. Yeah, if we're in an environment of blue light all day and we're not getting natural light, we're not getting red light, yes, we're going to start to see impacts with mitochondrial health. But that's different to the impact it has on sleep. Again, this is where it's nuance, understanding the outcome of what's happening. So that I would say is the biggest factor that most people struggle with sleep nowadays, is the fact that it's just watching things and going to YouTube until midnight, and sleep durations getting shorter as a result. The other things, of course, are stress. Worried about what they need to get done the other day, or the bills they've got to pay, or just family relationship issues or any kind of significant stresses that are on people's mind. That's also obviously going to be a big impact, a factor. And then pain. Pain, back pain, hip pain, knee pain. The lack of comfortability and movement in bed is also one of the most significant things that's going to disrupt people's sleep.
Because it's interesting, the people who need the sleep the most are kept up by the thing that they need to have sleep to recover from.
Yeah. Well, who would you say are the people who need the most sleep?
I've seen a lot of interesting research. Some say it's women. Women should need to sleep longer than men. Well, I think it's relative to the stresses that we face, right? Like, because
if you were to say a category of people, that maybe have a lot of physical stress.
Oh, I'd say athletes put the most stress on their bodies. Because it's all like recovery is relative to. Someone framed training and recovery in an interesting way. Like recovery is like, well, how would you frame it? Like recovery being relative to, like, because everyone's going to have different recovery demands, right? Like it's not a universal answer.
So I like to say that your effort should not exceed your ability to recover through the potential you have for rest. So if you lack potential to rest, the amount of effort that you put in, if that is mismatched, then we're going to eventually lead to overtraining, burnout, etc., etc. So we need to look at potential to rest. That is, how many hours can you get to sleep? How consistent can you be sleeping for? How much time you're going to get throughout the day to scatter in those little opportunities just to sit, go in, be still, notice what you're feeling, breathe through it. If you've got more potential there, which athletes do, because they train for a couple of hours or twice a day, 3 hours, but the rest of the day is spent feeding, resting, recovering. The problem is that most athletes are, they don't have routine then. On the phone a lot, up until night time, quite late. Yes, they've got travel plans. Yes, they've got contracts and stresses. So the athletic community have some of the most physical and emotional stresses, but they sleep the least. And so there's a big disconnect between those two areas when it comes to athletes. And they are, from quite clear in the literature, that they are often the shortest sleepers or the most disturbed sleepers.
Because it's interesting because when you train more, it's going to improve your ability to be able to handle future stress. So it's like this balancing of putting stress. It's like when you're training in the gym or, you're increasing your running mileage, like you're trying to scale your training loads, but you've got to make sure there's not too big a discrepancy, right? Like you said, between the stressor and your ability to recover from it. But as you train more, right, your ability to recover improves. So is that what it is? Is that what getting fitter is essentially? It's not, you're not actually, because it's essentially like fitness and health is like, we always frame it as like in the inverted way. It's almost like our ability to recover, essentially, right? Like that's the cornerstone of our ability to handle stress, is our ability to recover. But we focus so hard on like optimizing the training, like all the doing, but the recovering from that is almost quintessential to progress.
Yeah, and so I say you've got stress tolerance, which is your ability to handle exertion or mental capacity. It's like toughness. Now, in high intensity training gives us that.
Yeah,
I would say that if the majority of people did high intensity training, consistently, those people won't need to go to the ice baths to get resilience. People who train hard and go through suffering, and I'm speaking for myself and many other people here, we look at an ice bath and go, well, a minute in an ice bath or 2 minutes in an ice bath is nothing compared to that, an hour squat session that I've just been doing, or that, Tabata that I've just been doing for a while, because it takes a lot. So that does build your stress tolerance, okay? And that's the capacity to sit with stress. But then you have stress resilience, which is your ability to recover from the stressor. Okay, and so stressors are fine, and you can feel fatigued, and you can go into that place of overreaching and start to notice, okay, now my performance is starting to decline slightly. But if then you start to take 3 or 4 days off, or cut the load or the volume, and you bounce back stronger, you're in a good position. But if you recover and take weeks off or 2 weeks off and you bounce back and you don't improve your performance, you've actually pushed yourself too far. Because your body should be able to create those adaptations. If it can't create the adaptations, then potentially you're not training hard enough. But potentially, and I guess there's more low-hanging fruit, is you're not recovering enough. And so that's what that's what HRV is. When we're measuring HRV and we're using tracking data, is that, typically we're going to start to see, get patterns of HRV. And if that starts to decline and we start to see deviations from the normal, well, that's okay initially with the context. If the person says to me, I had a really hard training session yesterday, it was beyond what I typically do. And then we look at the HRV data the following morning and it's like, right, it's way above or way below. It's outside the normal range. Well, that just shows us that your system's trying to recalibrate and it's stressed. However, if the following day after that, they then cut back load and actually recover and it bounces back, hey, we're back, we're good. But if that continues to stay outside of the deviation, now we're starting to see issues with that nervous system and that heart recovering as well as possible. And that's where we need to start to think about deloads or protocols and strategies to put into place to ensure recovery is adequate.
How would you structure your bedroom?
No TV in there. Essentially, there's key areas. So light, you want to ensure that at night time, in the middle of the night, or as you go into bed, you don't want to be able to see your hand 1 foot in front of your face. And if it is, then it's too light in the room. Okay, so we do want to have complete darkness, pretty much. Sound, we want to ensure it's as soundproof as possible. Now, here in Western Australia, we have those horrible crows outside that sound like crying babies all the time. They wake you up at 3:40, 4 a.m. in the morning. And so if that is an issue, then ensuring people have, ways to reduce sound or noise. Temperature, we want to consider a temperature between 19 to 23 degrees Celsius, which is pretty cool.
Because colder is usually better, isn't it?
Yeah. The brain needs to reduce core temperature by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius to get into stage 3 sleep. And so if we're in a hot environment, then we know that brain is going to struggle to be able to get into those deeper stages of sleep. In fact, that's one of the main reasons why high-intensity exercise at night time, particularly here in the summer in Australia, disrupts sleep so much. It's not necessarily because the person's feeling stressed, it's because the core temperature struggles to drop down.
Get in the ice bath?
Well, you could, but when you get in an ice bath, you trick your brain into thinking the environment's cold. So then when you get out, your brain's trying to warm the body up. And so the best way to cool down is actually using what we call glabrous skin sites. Hands, cheeks, and feet. We have arteries that go directly to capillaries, and so the heat dissipates faster from those areas. So cooling the hands, the feet, and the face. So I like to get those electrolytes that you can get, the ice lolly electrolytes you can get from the pharmacy. And after Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when I've got home at 8:30 at night time and I've been doing 2 rounds of martial arts, pretty intense work, I know that I need to cool down. And so I might just stick my feet in cold water and just hold on to, eat slowly on two electrolyte lollies, ice lollies. And that's my way of them bringing that core body temperature down before I get to go to bed. Then there's one more thing that we have to consider is the quality of air in the room. Okay. And so if we're in a room where perhaps we're closing all the windows because it's too hot outside and we've got the aircon on, or it's winter months and it's too cold and we're closing all the windows and there's not adequate airflow, and we've got 1 or 2 or maybe 3 people in a room, we've got a young child in there as well, breathing CO2 into that room, we're going to start to see the CO2 levels rise in the room. And so typically, CO2 levels on average are about between 400 and 600 parts per million. Once they gets up about 800 parts per million, we're going to start to see cognitive decline. Once it gets above 1,000 parts per million, we're going to start to see disruptions to breathing during sleep and maybe even people waking up with anxiety. And people don't think about that because it's not something you can see. But I have an indoor air quality meter in my room, and essentially it gives me a warning when that gets above 1,000, and it's red in the morning. And the only time I see that happen is when my young baby is woke up in the middle of the night and comes into the bed with us, and there's 3 in a bed, and I notice, okay, 3 of us breathing in this room at the same time. We've got a pretty big room. That is causing issues, and so have to improve the ventilation.
Where do you think the balance is between using instruments like that and also tracking devices as data points, but not being too obsessed about it and letting it dictate how we feel?
That's a great question. I think we are seeing issues with obsessive data collection. We're in a market, particularly athletes and people who are optimizing and biohacking. They want to see these data points. But I work with so many people that I work with come to me and I ask them, how do you feel? Or how do you sleep? Oh, my Whoop band says this, or my Oral band says this. And I didn't ask that question. I asked you how you feel and how you feel you sleep. So people are offloading their own awareness to these devices. And you're right. It's like you wake up in the morning and you look at your sleep data and it says, oh, you had a terrible sleep last night. How much do you think that influences then how you feel going throughout your day? Rather than waking up and going, oh, like, how do I feel right now? And then confirming that with data.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Oh, my Whoop says 30%.
Yeah.
And therefore using that as a justification for, when things go wrong, you just start to say, oh, it's because I had a bad sleep. My Whoop said I had bad sleep.
Yeah. And the data points are there to kind of like help support how we feel, not the other way around, not dictate how we feel, just how you said. But most people do get, or a lot of people can get obsessed with those. And so having, the indoor air quality meter in your room, you don't need to have that. That's just because I'm just using it to track and to share. And
you're the best in the business.
and to educate. But me understanding that and knowing and being able to replicate and show people through data and saying, hey, this is what happens when my little one comes into the room, like that helps me understand it. So I can also then say to people, hey, look, just make sure you've got adequate ventilation moving through the room. That's enough for then someone to go around and go, right, do I have my windows open here? Do I notice fresh air? Does it feel a little bit stale? Is there times where more people are in this room? Or maybe when I'm traveling in a hotel and I'm living in a little tiny box, to make sure that the window's open and not fully closed, because that's going to disrupt my ability in the morning to be able to do my presentation, or, to show up for an athlete, for example, feeling fully recovered. So you don't need all that. In fact, majority of people I see, if they start telling me, if I ask them, how do you feel? And they say, oh, my Whoop says this, or Whoop says that, I say, well, we're actually going to take that off you for a little while. Because I want people to tune in with themselves, like I said at the very beginning. The best thing you can do, I think the future of performance is understanding self. Understanding when you've pushed too far and when you've pulled back, when you need to pull back. When you're stressed or dysregulated, or you have something going on in your life that maybe right now is a time just to focus more on downregulation and recovery. Yeah. And then when you're feeling as if you've recovered again, then you're pushing yourself more. And then we can start to reintroduce data points. And so, the way that I look at mine, it's like, okay, I know that if I've got a particular goal that I want to achieve physically, that I can't just train all the time. Yeah. I'm not 20 years old anymore. So I can't train intensely every day. I'd love to, because I enjoy it. But the fact is that I'll get injured and I won't improve. And so if I look at my data and if I wake up in the morning and I feel like, oh, geez, I'm sore today, my back's a little bit sore, my legs are sore, I'm feeling tired, and my data also says you're under recovered, today will be recovery. If I wake up in the morning and go, I feel good, but I look at my data and it says your recovery is only 50%, I'll only do the amount that my Whoop band says for the optimal amount of strain. If I wake up in the morning, feel good, and my recovery is 100%, let's just go for it. And so you've got a few different options that you can do. And that is what allows you to be more consistent. And at the end of the day, performance is about consistency. Yeah, it's about being able to continue to show up, whether that be athletic or whether it just be wanting to succeed in your own goals. And there's no magic way to achieve something other than being consistent and keeping showing up. And so that requires longevity. So that therefore requires adequate stress, but adequate rest.
Do you think with a lot of these, with our mindset around health, we're too focused on these like ergogenic aids, like these like little 1%ers, rather than just nailing the foundation?
Yeah, certainly. We're in a consumerist market end of the day, where a lot of businesses are trying to sell those small little products that are your tablets that you can take that's going to enhance your performance. But if someone is not going to bed and waking up at the same time, or not getting adequate sleep, or not resting enough, or just paying attention to how they feel and having those foundations in place, those products that you sell, they're pretty much a waste of time. Yeah, placebo might give you a little bit of effect, might make you feel better. And if someone says to me, and they come to me and they say, hey, I take this magnesium at night time and it makes me feel as if I sleep better, I'm going to say, yeah, cool, keep going. But we also need to get your foundational behaviors into place.
What about breath work? Like, how do you think that should be used, and the different types of breath work as well for different purposes at different times of the day?
Yeah, so within the breathwork space, we have, you could say, two different key areas. We've got like what we call functional breathwork or functional breathing, and then we have kind of more transformational breathwork styles. And so functional breathwork would be your everyday breathing. You know, I mentioned earlier how the physical way people breathe, the chemistry in the body, the relationship someone has to their breath in terms of, you know, people feeling anxious in their breathing or feeling quite kind of confident and trusting their breathing. There's things that you can do for that. That's like, you know, your box breathing, your down regulation. We have things like coherence, resonant breathing, up regulation breath practices. They're categorized as functional breathing. And so they're useful to understand that you want to breathe in a certain way to have a certain outcome, to create an outcome. And that might be, okay, right, I've just finished a workout or a presentation. I'm noticing my heart rate's elevated still. I'm still in a state that's feeling quite aroused. Maybe I'm triggered, whatever it is. I have a practice that I put into place following that, which is going to allow me to connect to my breath, breathe nasal, breathe gentle, breathe slow, breathe expansively, and that will gradually allow you to have the outcome of changing state to get you back to calm, grounded, present, recovered again. And so that's, you know, one category of sort of breath work practices that we have. Then we have the other side, the transformational styles, or the, you know, the healing modalities that people do. This is like conscious connected breathing or holotropic breath work. And those sort of practices are being used by people to, I guess, start to shift old patterns and memories or emotions that have been stuck in the past, to try and recalibrate and reappraise those to allow people to then have to shift behavior to basically change their life. A lot of people say things like trauma release breath work. You know, and that's because we do know that when we do things like conscious connected breathing, we start to disrupt the homeostasis in the body of biochemistry so much that starts to then shift how our brain is perceiving predictions. And it's like, we've never done this before. It creates this big error in our system. And when there's a big error in the system, there's an opportunity to learn. Learning comes through surprise. And so if someone all of a sudden has a memory that comes up or an emotion that comes up, and they're like, oh my God, like I completely forgot about that. But they're feeling safe in the new environment that they're in, you know, or they've got a facilitator that makes them feel safe, or they're able to process through their breath and then come back down again and allow the system to regulate it again. They might be able to change the way they see that emotion, that memory, or that moment in their life from a new perspective.
Because it's all association, isn't it?
It's all conditioning. Yeah. People think memories are fixed. They're not. Every time you recall a memory, the state at which you're in will become attached to that memory. And so there's big arguments now, like therapy is, you know, a beautiful thing, but therapy has gone so down the route of looking at the past and looking at people, their relationships to their mother and father and their school and stuff like that. There's people who are like, you know, breaking off relationships with their mom and dad because they recall a memory of something that happened when they're younger whilst they're feeling anxious or concerned now. And then it creates an association with those two things. And the blame then gets put onto someone else rather than responsibility. It's like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. I'm going to change the way I work with this, rather than going, okay, you did this to me. And that's not to say that people haven't done horrible things to people in the past, but that's what can happen.
Have you seen the history of psychology? Like what happened when they started following Freud's rather than Adlerian psychology, which is more of what we're talking about, the integration of the past and being responsible. Whereas I think Western therapy has gone a lot down the, you know, especially with the how it is in our society now with the identity and the labels, like it's labels are being used as like a badge of honor rather than being similar to the Whoop thing. It's like we're using like like a trauma score from the past and we're using that to like justify our action rather than using that as like information to become more aware of ourselves, but still taking responsibility for our actions.
Yeah, I truly believe that the using language to label something is what creates and manifests something into reality. Okay, and so just to give you an example, I have a training program, right, where I take people through 7 to 9 months of training through breath and sleep and emotional and nervous system regulation, and train at a high level of science. And I feel like I cultivate a really safe culture within that. And I get a lot of feedback of people saying, Martin, you're very open, you're really present, you really explain things well, everyone feels like they're heard. But I had a lady recently who signed up, and she said, sometimes I don't feel like I want to share in the group that we're in because we haven't sworn in psychological safety at the very beginning. And I was like, that kind of triggered me. I was like, am I doing something wrong here? Of course, I'm going to reach out to her. So what do you mean by that? So another coaching training that I did, on the very first day, we all raised our hand to swear that nothing would leave this confidentiality, and that we're not going to use any of this against each other, and that we're going to swear in psychological safety. And I thought, wow, what they've done there is they've labeled something and actually vocalized something in a space, which has created safety in that space, but also what it's also created is that when someone doesn't do that, it's created a polarity of that, so that person doesn't feel safe when that doesn't happen. And that's what the power of labels are. You could sit in one circle and call it a victim circle. And then when you're in that circle, everything that people say to you, you think it's about you. And you think, oh my God, I'm the victim here. You could have another circle where you're the creator of that circle, and you're choosing everything you do in life. And when people say things to you, you look at that and go, okay, well, this is my responsibility because I've created this. It's 2 circles, same thing, but 2 different labels. And so we have to really be careful with how we label things. I don't like labels at all because it creates boundaries and boxes and rigidity. And that's not how our brain works and physiology and body works. We're adaptable species.
Because we start to, with the label, for example, right, we start to expect things to play out a certain way rather than having that anchor point as ourself. It's like we need the outside world to mold to the expectation that we created through the label.
Yeah, there's a difference between saying, I'm an anxious person, or I have feelings of anxiety, then I have anxiety. There's a very different, subtle difference there.
Because there's a possessive quality to it. Anxiety is me.
Yeah.
And then it becomes part of the identity, right? You can use it.
Attachment grows into the ego, becomes a part of the personality. Yes, you can start to use that and go, I can't show up to work today. Rather than knowing that, okay, anxiety is a state that is created because of a reason, perhaps a misalignment, perhaps there's been something that's happened in the past, perhaps the way you're breathing. We can look at that and we can adapt to that and we can create change. And so that allows for malleability. Labels don't allow for malleability because now I've identified with it and I'm attached to that. And what happens is that when people then start to, for example, I start to come in and say, yeah, okay, I understand that you have anxiety, but it doesn't need to control your life. People get defensive because they're attached to it.
How does that go down? Like with people?
Exactly.
Like how does
some people get triggered by it because they become such an attachment to their personality. Now they've identified it, and identified with it. If I then say to them, hey, look, this doesn't need to control your life, that's going to trigger them because it means that their identity isn't real. But anxiety, a fear of future, is often something that's not real. How often do the things that we get anxious about come true?
Hardly.
It's not, because it's a perception. Yeah, it's a prior piece of information that our brain is anticipating because of a past event. But the future doesn't exist and the past has already gone. Yeah, and so understanding that where we are now and where we want to be, there's just a gap there that people can work towards, and that we are malleable, that we can update our perception, that we can change reality through exposure, through life circumstances, through real world lived experiences. This is where I also say breathwork is not enough. Breathwork gives opportunity to change states and opportunity to change perception, but action in the real world is what then confirms and validates to the brain that we can create change and that we can change. And so we always need action in the real world. So the best thing that you can do for anxiety is to act on the things that are making you feel anxious. Now that's hard, because you have to be able to regulate that sensation, that feeling, and be calibrated with that and still act anyway, despite the sensation and the feeling being something that you want to avoid.
It's interesting. I find it's very culturally driven as well, because like while we've had the great aspect of this mental health awareness has been the encouraging of people to communicate how they feel, but on the dark side of that is that it gives people the opportunity to avoid the responsibility. And I think the people who the messaging is really for are ignoring that, right? The people who need to really hear, open up about your mental health, they're the ones who continue to go on the accelerator. And it's the people who are always identified with their feelings, don't want to take responsibility, that hear this message and go, I don't have to take responsibility. I have this.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's always the labeling that we talked about before. Like the message always goes to the wrong people.
And this is where context, as I've said, matters, right? I can have two people that come to me. Both of them come to me and say, I'm struggling with anxiety. Can you help? My first thing to distinguish is going, is this true anxiety? Or is this someone just has such a chaotic life and they're so destructured and they've just got so much overwhelm that it's leading to them feeling anxious? Because anxiety disorders are different from feeling anxiety. Anxiety disorders, there's traumas and there's things that have occurred in the past. And yes, you can create a vacuum where people are stuck in that state. Other people just have such poor behavior or struggle with certain behaviors, or they just have such a chaotic life and they don't have discipline, structure, routine, habits, etc., that can help them. That's overwhelming them. And I will treat those two individuals very differently. And what you're saying, or what I'm hearing from you, is that we are giving both of those groups an opportunity to say, I have anxiety and therefore I can't do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, one of them I'm going to feel compassionate and empathetic towards. The other one I'm going to say, there's some things you need to sort out in your life. By sorting those things out in your life, by setting some boundaries, by sleeping when you should be sleeping, by having the ability to say no to more work and to honour yourself, is going to help resolve that anxiety. And I'm not going to then sit and just allow you to tell me I can't do this because, I've got anxiety. I'm going to have that truthful conversation both ways.
Do you think we're in a culture where we can, or how do you think about it as being like a coach and being in this space for a while, like, and you've worked with a lot of people, like challenging people versus asking them questions and them discovering the patterns themselves? Like, how do you find this balance of like taking someone through a process, like personalizing the message to get the most out of the person? What have you learnt from that?
You have to listen. You do have to listen, and then there's inferences that you make from listening. So, I'm never, if I don't know anything about someone's life, it's the first time I meet them. I'm going to be listening twice as much as I'm speaking. And I'm going to start asking questions to probe a little bit into maybe certain angles of maybe they've said, I've picked up on a certain thing, or I notice when they're talking about something, their physiology or body language changes. Maybe they start looking down, start bringing their arms in. I'm like, right, what's coming up for you there right now? Picking up on cues and then drawing that out of them to build a bit of a picture first. Then you can start probing. And then you can start asking the questions, right? And so I'm always, when I first work with someone, I'm not going to go down the route of just pointing fingers and saying, hey, look, you need to have honesty, you need to be truthful in your life here. I will frame that will be something I will do, but then it's a judgment case by case of when that starts to occur. To give you an example, right now I'm working with a gentleman, and we've been working together since May, so more than half a year now. And everything we did initially was all about regulating physiology, sleeping better, doing breath work, right amount of exercise, understanding himself, how to emotionally regulate. We're still working together now, but everything that we're working on now is just about having an honest conversation about what he's doing with his life. Yeah, and guess what he's got the most benefit from? The second component. Yeah, he keeps showing up. He keeps booking in with me just to have conversations about how can he speak to his wife about moving over to the East Coast because he wants to go and explore nature and wants to spend time over there? How can he tell his boss that he wants to work from home more so he can spend more time with his kid? Those things that are going to allow him to actually be aligned with his values in his life that he wants, and to be honest with himself, because there's so much disconnect between who he wants to be and who he is.
It's the easiest way to feel like you're the person you want to be when you show yourself you can do it by the evidence. It's undeniable when it's right in front of you.
But it requires calibration and the resilience and the capacity and the physiology to allow that space in the psychology to be able to be open enough to be able to make those choices.
So do you think, how much of a prerequisite is it? Like, what things require the prerequisite of the calibrating of the system versus just doing it and then realizing that you can do it and that's sufficient enough? Like, what requires the training grounds of building the internal system versus just going straight out to the battlefield?
Depends on the person's beliefs. Okay. Yeah. Beliefs are always going to overpower your regulation of your system. So if you believe something to be fearful, of course that's going to cause fear in the system. But if you believe something to be safe, that's going to regulate the system. And so if you have someone who, hey, look, I know I can change. I know that I can make these changes and I believe I can change. Well, you might go straight into the lifestyle stuff and they start to then do things that are differently in their life that then regulates the system. However, other people might not believe that. And so what you need to then is create opportunity for that to be malleable. And we do that by creating flexibility in the nervous system. The more rigid the nervous system is, essentially the more rigid thoughts are, or the less open the personality is. And so there's a very common pattern when I work with people who are highly stressed. You know, if it's a gentleman and it's the first day and I'm working with a CEO and I'm trying to have a deep conversation with them and getting them to open up, you know, I know sometimes that I'm playing around with fire here because I might trigger someone quite easily. And also they're not going to share that much with me because they're not so open to share. But then as we get 3 or 4 months in and we start to kind of regulate the nervous system, start to have more flexibility there, they instantly become more open. They start to share more about their life. They start to share more about their feeling because they've reconnected to themselves again. They start to recognize they've opened up that, you know, the egoic capacity to be able to receive more information from their unconscious, but also from other people. So there's a sweet spot that if I know someone starts to share more vulnerably, I can start to then be more on it, be more truthful with the direct, you could say the directness of what I'm speaking to.
Yeah. With the willpower one, is this, how can someone think about motivation and discipline? It's one of the biggest topics, right? About, you know, you don't need to be motivated, you just need to be disciplined. In that whole language and messaging, is there things that from the scientific side of it that people are misunderstanding?
I think it's motivation that gets you started. It's discipline that keeps you going. Yeah, so motivation, if we're talking about that from a standpoint, is just, you know, a chemical standpoint is adrenaline that provides you with the energy to move forward. But then the dopaminergic systems provides you with the anticipation of reward that's going to allow you to then actually take the action to do stuff. Okay, so there needs to be a significant reward that someone believes, and they also need to have enough energy in their system for them to take action. And that's usually via movement. That's what gets you motivation and then momentum. Yeah, so I always say motivation's first, then we've got momentum, then we've got mastery. And mastery is your discipline, your structures that you have into place that allow you to be able to keep showing up with that momentum. Okay, and this is going back, willpower might be first, but then we have the structures and discipline in place to know that, okay, if I continue to do and take these actions, I also need to have these things into place that's going to allow that to keep on occurring. And that's what your discipline is.
How does fulfillment tie into all of this? You've worked with a lot of people and worked with, obviously breathwork being one of the primary modalities and mastering all of their environment. What do you understand about fulfillment and, you know, doing all these things, but the anchor point is they're not creating a life that is truly aligned? Like, what with the conversation of fulfillment, what do you think's missing?
The pursuit of going after goals that you intrinsically love is what I would say leads to fulfillment. But we don't particularly live or have a society set up that pushes that. You know, we are in a capitalist, consumerist market where a lot of people judge themselves relative to other people, or relative to where other people are in life, or relative to what other people have. Yeah, all external things that are almost there just to validate that there's some self-worth there. That will lead to burnout. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. That eventually, if you keep showing up just for that reason, that's because it's not going to lead to fulfillment. How many times over and over again do you hear people getting to a point of success and going, well, that wasn't what I thought it was going to be? Yeah, world champion athletes who, like, they win the world championship and get depressed afterwards because they realize that the whole pursuit was what they loved. The end point, yeah, that doesn't give the fulfillment, because it's the pursuit of the goal that provides that continual motivation and energy and willingness and excitement to continue. That's the fulfilling component.
Why do you think that is? Like, it's always the journey we look back on, and it's the person we become on the road to these bigger goals. Is it because we're building a new version of ourselves that we love when we look back? Even at times it does feel like suffering and a bit of a grind, but then we get to the arrival point, right? Like, we might win something or find success in business, and it's never what we thought it was going to be. Is it because it doesn't really give insight or build the character strength like the journey did? Like, what do you think at the core of it is causing the journey to be so fulfilling, but the reward of the outcome, not really?
The journey gives meaning. It gives you meaning. It gives substance to what is it the actions that you're taking every single day. They have meaning to them because they're in pursuit of something. Yeah, they're in pursuit of a vision, something that's grander, something that's better, something that's moving forward. That's evolution. And we have, you know, the primary system that drives how we feel is our dopaminergic system. It's our motivational seeking system. We are animals that are continually seeking to move forward. And so that action and pursuit is what then fulfills us with meaning. But when we get to the end point, well, now all that meaning is gone because we're finished. And so in sports psychology, they quite clearly say, if you're getting towards the end of a goal, start setting your goals for your next goals before you've actually ended that pursuit. Because that allows you then to go, right, okay, here's an opportunity for me to step back and celebrate, but also we're going to get back onto that bandwagon of what's next. That's going to allow for new meaning and new substance and new fulfillment.
Because I find that there's this tension between focusing and obsessing on a goal, and that creates results, but it might not be fulfilling. But then when you shift your attention to yourself and the fulfillment, sometimes it can come with the sacrifice of some of those results. But we like to be single-minded, and we like to have this idea that the result is going to create all the fulfillment, create all the meaning.
Yeah.
But it's almost that calibration and acceptance of both aspects, having the goal in mind, but having a groundedness in yourself. But it's quite difficult to do.
It's I think it comes from the intentionality of the goal. Okay. And so I had a gentleman I was working with recently, and I asked him to sit down with his wife and to draw a map of what their vision together would look like in the future, to create, you know, some connection and some alignment with their goals. And I didn't give him much more information than just to do that. And his goals were all fear-based, and her goals were all fear-based. Okay?
What does that look like? Like, what would be a fear-based goal?
So the core of it was adventure, right? And she was wanting to move and live in a different country because she was feeling like she was going to miss out on the opportunity to do that, right? He was like, I don't want to move because we can do everything in that place where we are now. But it might not be, you know, it's a little bit harder. You know, she wants to move into a country where she'd surf right on the, you know, live on the beach and surf right there and have all the adventure there. He was like, we can do that now. You know, he was living in Adelaide. It's like there's a real good surf like about an hour away, but you know, it takes a little bit. It's cold and you know, it's not the best, but we can do that. He was all about reservation and being conservative, because worried about making a bad choice of moving somewhere else would be, you know, too fearful for him. What happens if it goes wrong? Whereas hers was about what if we do what we're doing now? What happens if we miss out on that opportunity? So I said, okay, right, you've both made goals that are attached to fear. And if you have goals that are attached to fear, that means that your focus is on fear. And so that's your anchor point. So no matter what actions you take, it's always going to, like an elastic band, recoil back to your intention, which is going to be focusing on that fear. But if I said to him, now what you want you to do is go and sit with your wife and say, if we were to remove all fear from this and choose from a life of love, the things that we love and joy and love for ourselves, sit down, how would that change? Yeah. How would that vision change? And then look where those gaps are. Look where you're making choices out of fear, and look where you're making choices out of love. And if we're making, a lot of people make choices out of fear. A lot of people motivated by fear. A lot of people have, you know, are driven by fear and succeed in that. But that's when we don't have that fulfillment at the end. But if we choose goals that we love and truly know that are intentional goals that we love, when we get those goals, we're grateful and we're at peace.
Yeah. I like this thing from, I think Brené Brown talks about it, but she talks a lot about having the courage and to dare to live a life that's really authentic to you. And she said something about what is worth failing at anyway. Like, what would be worth doing even if I failed? In the pursuit of it, it would be meaningful anyway.
Yeah.
And I love that, because it's like, I relate that to the podcast. I see that in so many people who are dreamers and they're trying to create this life. Like, even if it failed, at least it was failing doing something they love. Jim had a guest on and he referred to Jim Carrey's father, who, have you heard that story?
Yeah.
It was so good, because he was talking about his father, how he made all these sacrifices. He played it safe and he still failed. And the lesson he took from that, well, I may as well fail doing something I love, because you can still fail doing something you hate.
Yeah, for sure. And I got a prime example of that. So 2020, I'd been working in the space of clinical science in hospitals and in sleep labs and respiratory labs for 7 years. Okay, I'd grown up to be a senior respiratory and sleep scientist, earning 6 figures. You know, you go, right, you got a stable, decent job. Most people would say to you, stick with that. You know, keep working up that ladder. Keep doing that. But I started to feel unfulfilled from that. I felt like there was more I could do. There was more people I could reach. There's more people I could help. There's more creativity that I could involve in my life. And for about 2 years, I started to build an online business, but I was always afraid of losing that paycheck, you know, that regular paycheck, that safety. Then I met my now wife. In 2021, we started dating, and she said to me, "Oh, I'm leaving the country." I was like, "Okay." This is after 3 months of dating. I'm like, "Oh, this isn't going to go too well. We've only just started dating, and you decide that you're going to leave. Thanks for letting me know. Where is it you're going?" She's like, "I want to go and spend some time in Bali. I want to go discover who I am, and do some ocean conservation work over there." And we just made a decision at that point, like, okay, we'll keep seeing each other, and in 3 months' time, you'll go your way, and I'll go my way. And I'd made a vision board for myself probably about 6 months before that. And I said to myself, she's going on her journey. I'm not going to intrude on her journey. But if she ever asked me, would you come? I would consider it, because I'm not intruding on her journey. And we continued to see together. And about 2 weeks before she was due to leave, we had a conversation. And the conversation come up whether I'd considered whether I'd come. I was like, okay, this starting to sound like an invite now. And I said, I told her what I'd thought. I was like, but I have to make sure this is right for myself, and I'm not doing it just to follow you. Yeah. And so I went back to my vision. I looked at my vision, and it's like, right, my vision was to travel the world and build an online business, to meet a woman that's adventurous, to be able to have the freedom to go wherever I wanted to have a family and children. It's like, it sounds like she is leading the path of where I want to go with my vision, so it aligns. So I sat down with a mentor, and I told my mentor, hey, I think I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to go off to Bali with this girl that I've just met, and going to go travel the world and try and build an online business. And he's like, are you going to sacrifice everything you have for that? And I was like, I'm working in a job that I don't really like anymore. I don't really have much adventure. I don't have other than her, I don't have a partner. I don't have a family. I don't own a house. I've got, a bit of cash in the bank to keep me going. And he said, well, are you willing to lose all that in pursuit of what you want? I was like, I'm not losing anything. If I lose now that money in my bank, I'm just back to working in the hospitals again, back in Perth, and just renting a house and just getting back to where I am now. There's nothing to lose. And so I was like, yeah, of course. And now, 6 years later, 5 years later, I'm married, child, living in a house up in Mullaloo, got an online school on business, travelled the world for 2 years, still travelling the world whenever I want to. And I've built everything that I wanted to because I pursued love over fear.
I had a guest say something very similar as well. Like every single choice, you can ask yourself the question, am I choosing love or fear?
Yeah.
It can be that simple sometimes.
I generally think that's when you have a decision, that's the reflection you should make. Am I choosing this out of love or fear? And being truthfully blunt with that, because the mind will deceive you. Going back to this gentleman who was like, him and his wife who were making choices, kind of same choices, right? They both thought they were writing what they wanted in life until I pointed out, you've just wrote down what you want still based off fear. You're still being reserved in what you do because you're worried about what you might lose. She's still making choices about what she might lose out on. Both of them about loss, not gain. Yeah, and it's not gain about in terms of winning and succeeding and money, and this is about the gain of the experience of the things that you love and enjoy in your life, whereas they've both made decisions about what they might miss out on.
What internal signals would we have from a biochemistry standpoint when we are reflecting on that? Because I think a lot of us do have those forks in the road, decisions to make. And how could we understand some of the...
I generally think tuning in and sitting with the decision and thinking about the future and where does it feel and sit in the body. If it sits in the heart, you're probably making a choice from love. If the feeling comes from the gut and it's kind of like a little bit apprehensive, there's probably a choice from fear there.
Does that matter? Do sometimes we do we need, can we do something from a place of fear and then it works out? Or is it always going to be grounded in something?
I think there is certainly luck and willpower and hustle that can get you somewhere from fear, but that's the perception that you're going to create that results in the outcome. So you're still setting yourself up with habits and behaviors that are driven through fear, and so you're still going to sit with fear. Do you know what I mean there? So you can still have an outcome, get to an outcome, but when you get to that outcome, then you might start fearing that I'm going to lose this. Yeah, and so it comes back to places of being in scarcity or worry or concern, and that's rooted in the choices and what's driving your behavior. Whereas if you sit, and this is where it can be, I guess, challenging for people, because when you pursue things that you truly love, sometimes you don't get that excitement. Yeah, you don't get that adrenaline or worry or concern, where for some people it's exciting. You feel content.
There's a
presence, which is sometimes not enough because there's not enough chemistry there. So people don't think that that's something that is valuable.
They correlate the chemistry of cortisol as an indication for alignment, and this would analogous to relationships. Yeah. And it's exactly the same thing. The woman I'm with now, I had to do a lot of work on myself in the past, the relationship I had, because I was a codependent of when I met with a woman, it was like, right, all this chemistry, what made me attracted to them, and that's what I felt like we needed to keep. And then eventually that fades away, and it's like, right, am I bored? Is this person bored of me? And then the relationship starts. And my wife, I've just, from the get-go, the day we met, I just felt content and safe and relaxed with her the whole time. Yes, there's chemistry. Yes, there is, we connect well and we're intimate. But our life is just contentness. Yeah, and that was what I've realized is love. It's like acceptance of you and I and who we are and the life we live and
that we're working together, and the positives and the excitement and the negatives, it all comes together. But at the end of the day, when we come back as a unity, we're content and safe, which for some people is not enough if they are used to living in a state of excitement, adrenaline, fear, etc., because at least that is sensation they're experiencing.
Because I think the mind's really good at, when we're feeling fearful, of creating these like fantasy visions of our life as a way to escape how we feel, because we don't want to sit in the chemistry of fear of failure or looking in the mirror and sitting with that anxiety. So we create a fantasy of who we could be because we don't want to face who we are right now. Interesting.
Yeah.
Any concluding thoughts? What do you think the listeners should take away from everything you know? What would be the most useful things that they should be aware of?
I do think that sitting down and getting a spidergram and just going, like, my life of love, or my life of freedom, or my life of freedom and love, or whatever value set the person wants to experience in their life, and then mapping that out. I think that's a great place for people to start, because first of all, you uncover your values and things that provide you meaning in life and a compass to work towards in your behaviors. But then you do have tangible goals that you want to move towards, that are our internal goals, that are intrinsic, that are coming from within. And that in itself allows for just to see where you're not aligned. And that, when you start making an alignment there, stress reduces, anxiety can reduce, and people start to feel more motivated to take action. So I think that's a great place to start for people. But once you have that in a place, that's a mindset thing. That's a mental clarity thing of where you want to go in your life. But then you need to look at where are you in terms of your physical health, and the opportunity for you to create structure in your sleep, your movement, your breathing, your nervous system, your exercise. Like, then get those structures that provide you with the energy and motivational and resources to allow you to continue to move towards that goal. And by doing that, when you're feeling physically healthy, you feel more mentally capable. When you feel more mentally capable and aligned with who you are, you meet people who you are like-minded, and you build a network. Your social network is your potential for self, for your net worth. And so you can develop capacity and you can develop resources through your social network. And then if you want to, you can be a leader of that network. And by being a leader, you're directing people in a certain direction, which is towards your vision. And then you have people supporting your vision. And that's what helps you to move towards the pursuit of the vision that you first wrote down.
Where do we go to find more of your work?
You can just find me on social media, Martin McPhilimey. And if people are interested in learning more from me, School of Breath Science.
Awesome. Martin, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Egan. Appreciate it.